We don't expect any utility to act out of the goodness of their heart. They have an obligation to serve. This obligation comes from regulators. It is statutory law in the Public Utilities Code, because the tendency of the free market is toward profit, not equality, not goodness. And so that's the funny thing about public utilities, though. They're like monopolies that are kind of like less than monopolies now because we're trying to introduce competition at different parts of our energy system. But then they have these cages that we build around them. And sometimes they get out of the cage, sometimes we widen the cage. And that's the constant dance between the regulators and the utility. It's the regulatory compact.
Hey, Jeannie.
Yeah, Brew.
Who's our guest on the Energy Nerd Show today?
Well, today we have Kristin George Bagdanov. Hi, Kristin.
Hi.
Hey.
So welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. The obligation to serve, which we are here to talk about today, is all about balancing basically the public good with private interests, because monopolies with absolute power will be absolutely corrupt. Just to quote some philosophy there. And the obligation to serve is about making sure we're keeping the checks and balances of private interests and public good in balance. So to understand the full extent of obligation to serve, first, I'll kind of give a bit of like the literal definition today, but we do need to do a bit of historical work to understand the full scope. The bare bones definition is that it's essentially about the public utilities requirement to serve anyone in their service territory who opts to pay their prices. In most states, it is a law, and it can be articulated in like as few as 10 words, or it can be, several paragraphs across a public utility code. And again, it's about how it's interpreted. So the bare bones articulation is something like every public utility shall furnish service, reasonable service, very slim. So it's about how that's implemented. And the reason it's important to gas is because in a lot of places, that's being interpreted that gas utilities, once they've commenced service, must continue to provide service. But to understand that kind of public-private relationship, I think we need to go back a couple hundred years. So let's maybe start in Chicago as an example. We have in the mid-19th century, the first gas companies are forming. So at this point, they're using coal gas or manufactured gas, not what we think of today as natural gas or methane gas. The first company, Chicago Gas and Light, which doesn't exist anymore, when they started installing pipes in the city, they had an agreement with the city council, with the aldermen, about basically a franchise agreement to say, okay, if we're going to dig up the streets and put in these pipes, we want to make sure someone's going to use them. So they got a contract with the city. And then we want to make sure like we're the only ones doing this because it's a big investment. We want to make sure we get our money back on that investment. And so even though People's Gas was chartered soon after, and they're of course still around today, they had to wait till the franchise agreement was up for renegotiation before they could start providing service. And the clever thing they did to kind of maintain this monopoly power was Chicago and Peoples had sort of a backdoor agreement about carving up the city territory themselves. So it wasn't a regulatory mandate, but they said, okay, you serve the North, we serve the South. That way we won't have competition and we can grow our networks without fear.
So what now? Like, is there a way to get out of the current state? I mean, I know a lot of places, well, some cities are saying new buildings shouldn't have gas.
So maybe we should zoom out a little bit and think about why obligation to serve is such a hot topic right now in our already niche field of building decarbonization. Basically, if we're removing gas house by house, appliance by appliance, that's going to take like, I don't know what the exact number is, but like 1 million years in my estimation, to complete. There's a lot of pain points, a lot of coordination that is not happening that needs to happen. And so basically to scale up the work of decarbonizing the built environment in order to meet these, 2050 climate goals and just generally improve people's lives and health, we need to do things faster. And so that means we need to do this neighborhood scale decarbonization work where we're targeting sections of the gas system that should be pruned because of safety reasons or, have low demand anyways, targeting areas of the gas system that we can wholesale electrify or, replace with a thermal energy network. And for utilities to do this work, they want to make sure that when they go into a community, they're not going to have a scenario where one customer out of 100 says, hey, actually, I want to keep my gas service. I don't want you to electrify my home or remove my service. Because right now, how the obligation to serve is interpreted, that customer would have that right. And so that utility would either have to maintain the whole gas system for them or go through a process of abandonment proceedings and appropriately compensate that person, which is timely, costly, could be inequitable. And we call this person the holdout. And it's kind of become this like boogeyman that I hear like utilities talk about, like, what about the holdout? Like they're going to sink our neighborhood scale projects because of the obligation to serve. Suddenly, this thing that's supposed to protect consumers has become a sticking point for broader decarbonization.
Interesting. Well, thanks for being on the show. This is really interesting.
Yeah, thanks for having me.